They told me to wait outside, so I left and took 7 employees and 5 clients with me. My name is Isla Merrick. I'm 32, and until last year, I was the senior logistics analyst at AxisRoute Corp, one of the fastest-growing supply chain firms in Seattle. I have a photographic memory, a strange comfort with chaos, and a frustrating tendency to believe that merit still means something. The first time I felt it, that invisible weight pressing down, I was sitting alone in the office kitchen, finishing a report on global port congestion patterns. Everyone else had gone home. It was 9:42 p.m. I remember because the light above the microwave flickered at exactly that minute, like it was mocking me. Back then, I still believed in the system. I had joined AxisRoute right after finishing dual master's degrees in operations science and data modeling. I was fresh-faced, optimistic, and obsessed with building systems that made things better. In my first year, I developed a predictive model that reduced inventory errors by 37%. The CEO himself sent out a congratulatory email. My name wasn't in it. I told myself it was okay. The second year, I redesigned our shipping algorithm to avoid bottlenecks at underfunded East Coast ports. The result, clients saw an average of 22% faster delivery times. My reward. Watching my manager, Dominic Hale, present the findings as his department's collaborative effort, I clapped along like everyone else. What they didn't see were the late nights, the spreadsheets open on dual monitors, the coffee-stained notebook where I sketched framework after framework until the data clicked into place like gears locking in a safe. I never asked for attention, just a seat at the table. That was my mistake. My parents, dad, the town librarian, mom, a high school math teacher, raised me to believe that if I worked hard and played fair, I'd be recognized. But at AxisRoute, the only thing that got you recognized was your last name or your belt color on the executive leadership chart. Still, I kept going. I swallowed my frustration when Dominic said I wasn't leadership material after I challenged a cost-cutting measure that ignored client satisfaction. I bit my tongue when I was excluded from meetings where my own frameworks were being dissected. I even smiled when I trained new hires who got promoted before I did. I convinced myself that the work mattered more than the credit, that ideas would speak for themselves, but ideas don't have voices. People do. And mine was being silenced. At some point, I stopped attending happy hours, stopped trying to network over wine and bruschetta with people who couldn't spell logistics without spell check. I stayed in my lane, kept my head down, and worked harder. That was how I ended up building the system that changed everything. Over 6 months, I quietly assembled a new logistics framework, one that integrated predictive delays, cross-border freight taxes, supplier irregularity indexes, and even macroeconomic risk factors. It was clean, efficient, scalable. It was the kind of system that didn't just improve a company's operations, it defined them. I finished the final simulations one rainy Sunday night. I should have been proud. Instead, I stared at my monitor thinking, will anyone even know this was me? But I submitted it anyway, through the proper channels, just like always. At the next quarterly strategy meeting, I watched as Dominic skimmed past my solution in a 2-minute slide summary. No details, no credits, just, we're reviewing a new logistics overhaul. More to come. My stomach sank, again. I walked home in the rain that night without an umbrella. The cold didn't bother me. I was used to feeling invisible, but things were about to change. She walked on stage with my work and accepted the award meant for me. 3 weeks after that meeting, everything spiraled. Her name was Tessa Vaughn, fresh out of Princeton, blonde, sharp-tongued, and always perfectly manicured. She had this air about her like she'd already been promised something the rest of us had to beg for. We were told she'd joined as a temporary intern. What they didn't say, she was the niece of our CEO. Within days, she was looped into meetings I wasn't even told about. People who'd never responded to my reports now huddled around her desk, laughing too loudly at her comments and parroting her insights like scripture. She shadowed Dominic for exactly 10 business days. Then, like magic, she scheduled a board presentation titled Optimizing Cross-Continental Shipping, a Modern Framework. That was my title, word for word. I opened the deck she'd sent to leadership and felt my pulse spike. It was my framework, my equations, my diagrams, even the naming conventions I'd created during those lonely weekend sprints. She'd changed some of the visuals, softened the language, added unnecessary fluff. But the structure was unmistakably mine. I confronted Dominic. "Is this some kind of mistake?" I asked, holding up my original report side by side with Tessa's. "She's using my system." He didn't even blink. "Tessa's version reflects senior leadership priorities, yours didn't," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "It's not about who came up with something first, it's about who delivers it best." Those words cut deeper than I expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were so casual. That's when I understood in their world the truth didn't matter. Perception did. 2 weeks later, Tessa stood in the center of the grand ballroom at the downtown Seattle Convention Center, surrounded by glittering lights and soft jazz. She wore a silky navy dress. I wore my best black blazer, sitting 3 rows behind the executive table, far from the stage I had earned. I watched as a host announced the recipient of AxisRoute's annual Innovation Excellence Award. I already knew whose name would be called. Tessa Vaughn, applause, flashbulbs, a slow, triumphant walk to the stage. My breath caught in my throat as I saw the slide behind her, the Vaughn Framework for Global Logistics Optimization. She smiled like she'd invented fire. No one saw me gripping my chair. No one noticed the folder in my lap, the same folder I'd used to compile the original research. 6 months of work, weekends, sacrifices, all reduced to a PowerPoint under someone else's name. The clapping slowed. People returned to their wine glasses. Then I heard it. "You can wait outside." Renata, the marketing director, stood near the doors. She didn't whisper. She didn't even glance at me. "We're at capacity for the ceremony. You understand?" I looked around. The room was massive, plenty of space. Even the new interns had seats. But I was the one they chose to dismiss. That was the moment everything crystallized. The stolen credit, the whispered excuses, the silences, the hierarchy that didn't just tolerate injustice, it demanded it. I stood calmly. "I see," I said, and then quietly, I opened my laptop. "Check your email." I realized I'd been building their empire while they erased my name. I walked out of that ballroom and into the night heels, clicking against the marble floor like a ticking clock. They didn't follow. Why would they? To them, I was just another name, buried in a spreadsheet, another cog in the machine, replaceable, forgettable, disposable. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, the city lights bleeding through my windshield. The folder lay in the passenger seat unopened. My chest felt hollow. Not angry, just tired. So damn tired. 3 years of work, of giving more than I ever took, of believing that excellence would earn me a place at the table. Instead, I'd been used as a stepping stone for someone who'd barely learned where the break room was. I went home that night and didn't turn on the lights. I just dropped my bag on the floor and sat against the door knees pulled to my chest. I'd been quiet. I'd been patient. I'd followed every rule, dotted every I, documented every breakthrough, and none of it had mattered. They didn't even think I deserved a chair. My apartment was filled with reminders of the person I used to be. Whiteboards with half-finished models, sticky notes color-coded by problem type, books on optimization psychology negotiation, all the tools I thought I needed to navigate a career built on skill. But I'd brought logic to a game run by politics. I was never going to win. That night, something snapped. Not in anger, but in clarity. If this was how AxisRoute measured value, if betrayal and silence were rewarded, while integrity was ignored, then maybe it was time I stopped trying to win their game and built my own. I stayed up till sunrise outlining my plan, not out of revenge, but because I finally saw the truth. They didn't just overlook me. They depended on me not to fight back. So I started with what they'd stolen, my original logistics framework. I enhanced it, strengthened it, made it bulletproof. Then I created something entirely new, a platform so advanced, so efficient it made the version Tessa presented look like a school project. But I wasn't just building software, I was building leverage. Over the next few weeks, I worked in silence. I never accessed company servers, never used office hours. Everything I touched was mine, every line of code, every chart, every insight. At work, I acted the same. I nodded during meetings. I shared lukewarm ideas. I let Dominic believe I was defeated. Meanwhile, I compiled every instance of stolen credit emails, timestamps, colleagues who'd seen it all and said nothing, but remembered everything when asked the right way. I reached out to ex-employees who'd left under amicable terms. Turns out, amicable was corporate speak for sick of being robbed. There was Tamara from R&D. She'd developed a temperature-stable container prototype that was quietly patented by someone else. Leo from Client Services. His entire retention model was repackaged and rolled out by a VP. They thought they were alone. They weren't. We started meeting, quietly, off-site, sharing stories, sharing pain, and slowly, something remarkable happened. We formed a team. Not just any team, but one filled with visionaries and fighters who were ready to build something that finally lived up to their talent. We didn't need AxisRoute. We needed each other. They didn't see it coming because they never bothered to look at me. 3 months before the next awards ceremony, I walked into a quiet cafe in Capitol Hill with a folder under my arm, this one very different from the one I'd clutched that humiliating night. Across the table sat Gail Iverson, a venture capitalist known for investing in ideas that rattled industries. "Walk me through it," she said, tapping her pen against a black moleskin notebook. So I did. I showed her the new logistics framework version 0, not just better than AxisRoute's model, a category-defining evolution. It accounted for real-time weather shifts, labor strikes, tariff fluctuations, and even geopolitical risk in multi-country routes. It wasn't just smart, it was self-learning. She blinked twice, then asked, "But why leave a stable position to risk this?" "Because I'm not starting from scratch," I said and slid the second folder across the table. It contained bios, 7 of them. Tamara, Leo, Meredith, Marcus, Dana, Felix, Jordan. Each one had experienced what I had stolen ideas, blocked growth, systematic erasure. Each one had already committed to joining me. Gail's eyes widened. "You're building an elite defection. I'm building a future that respects talent over politics," I said quietly. 2 weeks later, the funding was secured. 1 month after that, we had office space leased under a holding name. I called it Vector Nova Logistics. We weren't just a startup. We were a statement. Every legal detail was airtight. My framework developed on personal time with personal equipment and documented down to the second. We had preliminary patents. We had internal prototypes. We had non-disclosure agreements with our team. And most crucially, we had dignity. I reached out quietly to 5 of AxisRoute's most frustrated clients I had worked with directly who'd expressed concern about AxisRoute's rigidity, their delays, their outdated tech. I didn't pitch them. I invited them to a private beta demo. 4 of them signed letters of intent within 2 weeks. The 5th, he asked if he could invest. We were ready. The only thing left was timing. So when I learned that Tessa Vaughn would be receiving the Innovation Excellence Award again for her continued impact on global logistics modeling, I knew it was time for my final move. The night before the ceremony, I finalized the press release, Vector Nova Launches to Redefine Global Logistics. I queued up the email drafts, my resignation, the team's resignations, the client transfers, the patent notices, and I scheduled the blast for 9:00 a.m., the same moment they planned to hand Tessa her second undeserved award. I arrived early that morning wearing a tailored navy dress and quiet confidence. I held a slim presentation folder just for show. Dominic walked by and nodded without speaking. Tessa flashed a condescending grin. Renata, as always, managed to look through me like I didn't exist. And then once again she said it. And she said, "You can wait outside. Only this time I smiled. I opened my laptop, clicked send, and as the ding of email notifications echoed through the ballroom like firecrackers, I turned and walked away. 3 years of silence replaced by one beautiful storm. By the time they read my email, I was already gone. I had barely stepped into the parking garage when my phone lit up like a signal flare. Missed call Dominic Hale. Missed call Tessa Vaughn. Then the CEO, then HR. Then a string of text bubbles that came faster than I could swipe them away. By the time I reached my car, they had seen it. 7 resignation letters, 5 client transfer confirmations, patent filings, a press release set to go live in 60 seconds. It was no longer a warning. It was a done deal. That's when I heard footsteps. Isla Wait Vincent Lang. Our vice president was jogging across the garage like someone chasing a departing flight. His designer shoes slapped against concrete, his usually perfect hair damp with sweat. He reached me out of breath. You can't just leave like this." "Funny," I said, unlocking my door. "That's exactly what I'm doing." His face twitched like he couldn't quite decide whether to panic or posture. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said. "You were absolutely going to be recognized. The seating mistake was a clerical error." I finished one eyebrow raised. He nodded too quickly. I stepped closer, my voice calm. Was it also a clerical error when Tessa presented my framework as hers, or when my name was removed from the Q2 Innovation Report, or when Dominic stood on stage quoting the opening lines of my white paper without a footnote in sight? Vincent exhaled hard through his nose. "Business is complicated, Isla. Contributions are often shared." "Sure," I said, except mine were always the ones, shared, never celebrated. He glanced around like someone trying to calculate leverage. "We'll make it right. Promotion, stock options, name your number." I smiled finally, genuinely. "I'm not negotiating for a seat at your table, Vincent. I built my own." As I pulled out of the garage, more notifications flooded my phone. I ignored them all, because it wasn't just over. It was beginning. That afternoon, I met my team at our new headquarters, an old industrial loft we'd converted ourselves. Tamara Leo Meredith and the rest were already there, laptops open, mugs in hand, eyes bright with purpose. "Did they try to stop you?" Meredith asked, barely looking up from her screen. They offered me everything I said, settling into the chair at the head of the long, mismatched table we'd built from reclaimed wood. "Bet that felt good," Leo said with a smirk, handing me a fresh coffee. "Not as good as this," Will I replied, opening my laptop to show them our first signed client contract, complete with referrals to 2 others who'd been impressed by the new system. We spent the next 6 hours planning launch strategy, refining messaging, prepping onboarding, and triple-checking legal coverage. At 7:30 p.m., my phone rang. Blocked number. I let it go to voicemail until Tamara glanced over and whispered, "That's the board chairman's private line." I answered, putting the call on speaker for everyone to hear. Ms. Merrick came the deep voice of Preston Fulton, the ghost-like chairman of AxisRoute's board. "I believe we need to talk." "I'm listening," I said evenly. "I've reviewed the documents you sent," he continued. "Your claims are concerning. I'd like to discuss a potential resolution, one that brings you back into the fold. With all due respect," I said, "there's nothing to resolve." A pause, then a sharper tone. "Perhaps I wasn't clear. Our company has resources you cannot match. If you proceed with this, we will take legal action, confidentiality breaches, patent disputes. We'll ensure your startup never launches." I looked at Leo, who quietly hit record on the call. "Mr. Fulton, your legal team already confirmed 6 months ago that my frameworks weren't considered proprietary. They passed on filing because they didn't see the value. Clients are contractually bound to us," he barked. "Bound to performance clauses," I corrected, "which your teams repeatedly failed to meet. I didn't persuade them to leave. I gave them a better option. Silence, then finally, what would it take to bring you back? Name your terms." I glanced at my team, every one of them watching, waiting. "There are no terms," I said. "This isn't a tactic. It's a future. and it's already moving." I hung up. The room sat in silence for a beat, and then Tamara raised her coffee mug. "To Vector Nova," she said, and to Isla, who reminded us that we don't need permission to be powerful. They once told me I wasn't worth a seat. Now I own the whole table. 6 months after the launch of Vector Nova Logistics, we had grown from 8 rebels to a team of 23 carefully chosen minds people who had been overlooked, underestimated, and underpaid by companies that valued compliance over creativity. We didn't do trust falls or buzzwords. We built systems, real systems, ones that saved our clients 31% in shipping costs on average, exceeding even my original projections. We didn't poach talent. People came to us. Whisper networks turned into referral avalanches, disillusioned engineers, smart but sidelined account managers, developers who were tired of being told maybe next quarter when they asked for credit. We had a wait list. 1 year to the day after I was told to wait outside, I received an invitation to speak at the Global Innovation Summit, the very same industry conference that had once used my work without using my name. This time, I wasn't watching from the back. I was the keynote speaker. As I stepped onto that stage, the lights hit me, just like they had hit Tessa when she walked off with my award. But this time, I wasn't shaking. I wasn't small. I wasn't waiting. I stood at the podium, looked out at the crowd faces. I knew faces I used to fear, and I began with the words that had once gutted me. "You can wait outside." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Those words changed my life," I said. Not because they hurt, though they did, but because they showed me a truth I had refused to see. The room stilled. I was waiting for recognition from people who would never give it. I was measuring my value by their standards. Standards built on favoritism, on performative leadership, on a culture that rewards the loudest voice, not the best mind. I didn't name AxisRoute. I didn't need to. This story was never about revenge. It was about clarity. When I left, I didn't leave quietly. I left with my work, my team, my integrity, and a vision that couldn't be ignored. I paused, watching heads nod, some in solidarity, some in regret. Innovation doesn't start in boardrooms. It starts in quiet offices after hours. It starts with people who stay late, not for praise, but for purpose. It starts when someone decides to stop waiting and starts building. I closed my speech with one final line. The most powerful seat isn't the one they offer you. It's the one you build yourself. The applause was immediate, not thunderous, not dramatic, but steady, respectful, real. Afterward, a familiar face approached me in the reception hall. Tessa. She looked different, smaller, not physically, just quieter. "I didn't know," she said. "They told me your part was minor, that you'd been compensated." I nodded once. "I'm sorry," she said. I started to say something, then stopped. She wasn't the villain, just the convenient vehicle. She had benefited, yes, but she hadn't built the machine. So I left her there, in the crowd, in the past. Back at our office that afternoon, Meredith had pinned our first client's renewal contract to the wall. Next to it was a framed quote I hadn't seen before. It read, "Never beg for a seat. Build the whole damn table." I smiled. We were expanding into Europe. Our patents had just been approved. An acquisition offer had been declined twice. But this wasn't about numbers. It was about people. It was about creating the kind of workplace where you don't have to raise your voice to be heard, where ideas matter, where no one is told to wait outside because the door was never meant to close in the first place. So, if you've ever been dismissed, overshadowed, or told your contributions didn't matter, know this: you are not invisible. You are not small. You are building something even if they can't see it yet. Have you ever been underestimated or had your work stolen? How did you take your power back? Drop your story in the comments. Share and subscribe if this story hit home. And remember, sometimes the betrayal is the spark, but you are the fire.